And President of the United Nations has affirmed that the UN is committed to eradicating poverty and hunger across the world. Joining me now on the news to speak about this is Dr. Bola Adediran, a public affairs analyst. Many thanks to you, Dr. Bola Adediran, for joining us on this hour. Let's go through a few statistics here. We know that across the world, 1.3 billion people across 101 countries are multidimensionally poor. And when you also look at the wealth gap, there's an increase in the wealth gap, across the world. So how enormous and realistic is this tax before the United Nations?
Well, it's a definitely difficult tax, especially when it is put when the objective is to completely eradicate extreme poverty by 2030. As you've rightly mentioned, the income inequality in the world is increasing. In fact, since the financial crisis in 2007-2008, we've seen that the number of billionaires have increased, more than doubled in 10 years since then. We've seen that, in fact, in the last 2-3 years, we've seen that the 26 of the richest people in the world, 26 richest billionaires in the world, own as much as 3.8 billion of the poorest people in the world. So in terms of the global inequality and across nations and within nations, it is very difficult to see how the plan of the President of the General Assembly can be met if one puts that plan squarely side by side with the realities of the modern world.
Professor Muhammad-Bande says, look, this is a priority for him in terms of being the president of the UNGA. But how can he ensure that governments around the world also begin to make that a priority?
Well, we'll have to recognize that the President of the General Assembly, really, in terms of his powers, it is more of a ceremonial position without real powers in the first place. The General Assembly is known as a talking shop. Yes, in some sense, because it represents 193 nation states in the world, it has that moral authority to speak about these issues and to kind of shed light on the subject. So there is a sense in which his position and the fact that he's talking about this brings these issues to the fore. But in terms of real powers, in terms of being able to really deliver on these promises, I think these are lost dreams that Professor Bande really has. And I'm not completely sure that he has the institutional capacity or the backing to bring these goals to fruition.
Let's bring it back home to Nigeria. We know that there's an increase in numbers of people who are now living below poverty, just below poverty line. And some people survive now on humanitarian aid in the country. So what can our own government here do to ensure, because again, we've heard the president say he wants to also reduce poverty in the country. So what are some of the things he can begin to put in place to ensure poverty is reduced in the country?
Well, I think the most important thing across the world, which has been proven over and over again, is that you've got to look at the education of the girl child. That if you want to lift a society out of poverty, then you have to educate the girl child. You've also got to obviously invest a lot in education. But more importantly is you have to create institutional mechanisms and policies that ensure that young people, especially young women and girls, have the opportunity to thrive. And I think that's definitely a policy area that I would want to see the government of President Muhammadu Buhari do a lot more on.
Dr. Bola Adediran, many thanks for your time.